You are now watching the Browns of the Browns podcast.
Percent looking, firing, end zone. Oh, what a catch by Njoku! Snap back, he's into it. Line drive, end over end. The kick is up, and it is. It is good. Ken York hit the field goal from 58 yards out.
And we're back for another episode of the Browns of the Browns podcast. And finally, we've made our return after a little hiatus, you could say. So after the 2023 season, we got a lot to discuss. So I'm Michael, NFL Cleveland Browns, alongside Matt.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so for starters, let's just pick it up right where we left off, I guess. We haven't made an episode in, I feel like, a year and a half, but we definitely haven't made one since the 2023 season. So we got to start with the most recent stuff. So Deshaun Watson, Cleveland Brown, obviously. Year didn't go the way we wanted to. Guy was suspended for 11 games or whatever it was, came back against Houston, played only 6 games a season. Browns did not have the year they were hoping for, but you couldn't really expect a lot more, I guess you could say, from a team that played the majority of their season without their quarterback, a team that had a lot of, I guess you could say, discontinuity in the offseason with a lot of turnover, especially at the quarterback position, which, as we know, is as important a position as there is in sports. So, Matt, what did you think was the biggest issue that really caused Cleveland to perform the way they did?
Yeah, obviously going 7-10 is not anything Browns fans wanted to see at the beginning of the year. But my biggest concern with them was they couldn't close. They had so many close games that they just couldn't finish, whether it was the Atlanta game, the Chargers game, even the Carolina game that they won. They just kind of narrowly escaped, and they really should have just, dominated that game. That was one of the issues I've, always seen with Stefanski these past couple of years is we always kind of let teams hang around. And, this year it kind of just, bit us in the butt. Like, we couldn't close these close games. And when you're losing so many games by 3 points, 1 touchdown, it caught up with our record. So I also had a question for you. Obviously Deshaun didn't play, the way we all expected him to. But I kind of feel like it was an unfair expectation for all these Browns fans to kind of have this guy to just walk in after not playing in 2 years. He didn't even get a full offseason with the team. He had to learn a new offense on the fly. I just want to know if you think there's any reason for concern, or if if Browns fans can, kind of just relax and trust this trade was made for a reason. Like, this guy did, almost lead the NFL in every passing metric in 2020. So.
Well, yeah, for me, I'm not concerned. Like, I see a lot of this talk daily on social media, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Instagram, whether it's just articles being written where people are saying how concerned they are with, you could say, the regression of Deshaun. But to me, it's not as much of a concern because you got to take it, you got to look at the context behind it. This is a guy who is moving to a new city. He's changing the way he does everything within his career. He's had this stability, I guess you could call it stability, even though Houston's not necessarily a stable organization. He's had the stability being in one place his entire career, being in one city, being with a certain group of guys. Now, when you move teams, that all changes. And at the quarterback position, it's the hardest turnover to have. That's why they get paid the most in all of sports. That's why this guy's getting $230 million guaranteed, because it's that hard of a position and because it takes that caliber of a person, that caliber of a player to be able to adjust and to be able to withstand whatever's being thrown at him and still be able to be successful. So I don't think it's a concern. It's to be expected. It's not possible for a quarterback to take a year and a half off and then come back like he hasn't missed a beat. Like, it's not something that anyone's ever been able to do because of how hard the position is and because of how much is expected of you at that position, practically leading the organization both on and off the field. So it's not something that, like, yeah, you want to be optimistic and you want to say, yeah, Deshaun's going to come in and he's going to lead us to 6 wins in a row and we're going to go to the playoffs. But that was never a realistic expectation, I don't think. And this is just kind of the growing pains that come along with changing a quarterback and really just changing the entire forecast of what your franchise is going to look like by going out and picking up a guy like Deshaun Watson, who now is your guy and is going to be your guy for the next decade plus. So, and just to go back to what you said about closing, I think that point is definitely overlooked because we finished the year off with, oh, Saints game, Deshaun didn't play well. They let a couple opportunities slip away. But if you look at their early part of the season, like the Jets game, you have to win that game. You have to 99.9% win chance according to ESPN. You have to win that game. The Falcons game, how many opportunities do we have in that game to close that? You have to win that game. The Chargers, they give us the ball back on, I believe, their own 47 with less than 2 minutes to go. You can't
Ravens
lose
game
that
too.
game, and then you get a first down fairly quickly. You have to win those games, and that is the difference between sitting here talking at 7-10, looking back at the season and how it all played out and being disappointed versus, okay, we made the playoffs and who knows what could have happened if you get to the playoffs in this NFL. Anything can happen. So I think there's definitely some positives to build on going into next year. And then just the moves that they've made so far this offseason. I know it's early. We haven't gone to free agency. We haven't gone to the draft, which we'll talk about later. But the firing of Joe Woods, the firing of Mike Prefer, the additions to the coaching staff across the board. But the two we want to talk about definitely are Bubba Ventrone at special teams, and then the pickup of Jim Schwartz, the veteran defensive coordinator, who's had experience as a head coach. He's had experience as defensive coordinator. He's had experience as a defensive assistant. He's just had an unbelievable career, and I think he's an unreal addition for a defense which it struggled mightily last year. So Matt, what are your thoughts on kind of where we're going and what these two guys are going to kind of bring to us moving forward here?
So firstly, I just want to say everyone wanted to give Kevin Stefanski this criticism for not taking accountability. And, Mike Prefer, the special teams coach, and Joe Woods, former DC, those were two of his close friends. So if you don't think Stefanski's all in looking for a huge year, he is. He fired two of his close friends and brought in, two guys that really could have some potential head coaching buzz if it comes down to it. Jim Schwartz is a guy that's been recognized as a top defensive coordinator all over the NFL. In Philadelphia, they won the Super Bowl with him when they didn't have that great of an offense, with Nick Foles running their offense, playing quarterback for them that year. And of course, he was also, senior assistant with the Tennessee Titans. I think with Schwartz, he's really going to get the most out of our star players. I feel JOK is primed for a breakout season. And I think Miles, could have one of his best seasons yet. I really think the 4-3 scheme will get the most out of our players. And another thing with Schwartz is a lot of his former players for the defense that he ran in Philly are, starting to show some interest in Cleveland. Hopefully, as what you said, we'll talk about this later when we discuss potential free agents. Hargrave, Fletcher Cox, Brandin Graham, maybe even some guys from Tennessee, will want to join the team as well. And of course, Bubba Ventrone, all the Colts fans rave about this guy. They think he's someone that can become a potential head coach one day. So just two, through the roof hires. What were your thoughts on those hires as well?
I mean, for me, I think Cleveland did a really good job throughout this process. I think they did their due diligence in both categories. With DC, they really went through a thorough, I feel like, I guess you could say, investigation of the potential candidates, whether it be Flores, Sean Desai, Jim Schwartz, albeit he was the guy who got the job. But I think Cleveland, and Stefanski actually spoke about this at the Combine a couple of days ago, but when you do things like that, you're able to learn more about yourself as well, because you hear these different opinions and you hear these different ideas from what these different football minds have within their minds about how they can better your football team. So I think you get a lot of perspective on where you're sort of heading as a football team throughout these sort of ordeals where you're hiring new coordinators, whether it be offensive, defensive, or special teams. But I think they definitely got it right. Bubba Ventrone, former Cleveland Brown, he's big time energy guy. I mean, the Colts players rave about him. Colts fans, like you said, rave about him. There was a there was a one of the linebackers that they have for the Colts. His name is I can't remember his name right now, but he's a free agent right now. He did an article with or he gave an interview to ESPN or somewhere, and he said like he just totally messes with Bubba. Bubba's like an unreal guy, and anything that Bubba says, like people listen to. So that's what you need in a coordinator. And then Jim Schwartz's resume, I feel like speaks for itself. He's been a head coach. He's won a Super Bowl as a defensive coordinator. Brandon Graham was asked about him at the Super Bowl, and he said like the Browns are getting a great one. Obviously, Brandon Graham's a free agent. Discuss that as we proceed through this, but I mean, the Browns believe that Jim Schwartz is as important to fixing this defense and fixing this D line in particular as any personnel additions that they could make. So I think that says something about this guy's pedigree, this guy's ability to really alter defense, and this guy's ability to bring success to a defensive side that's young but has a lot of potential. So staying on that defensive side, the first move this Cleveland Browns organization has made personnel-wise in this offseason of 2023 is John Johnson III. He's been released, saving $9.5 million. I'm not sure if they put a post-June 1 designation on it, or I think it may have been just after March 15th when the league year begins, but regardless, it's a $9.5 million cap break. This comes after he was one of Andrew Berry's first big splashes as a general manager in free agency. Obviously, stuff didn't work out in Cleveland. I got to know John Johnson a little bit, having him follow the page for his sort of tenure in Cleveland. He's a really good dude. So it's tough to see those kinds of people leave when you know they have a big voice in the locker room, but he had a tough year. I think a lot of it comes down to usage for John Johnson. I don't think he was ever used correctly in the same way that he was in Los Angeles, where he saw a lot of his success, like giving him the chance to get that $33 million contract that he got with Cleveland, I believe it was. So I think a lot of it comes down to that, but Jim Schwartz comes in, new defensive coordinator. He obviously says to AB, like, I don't see a fit with him regardless of the new scheme that we're going to bring in and what we're going to try and do. So you hate to see guys like that who are popular in the locker room, who are big in the community, on their way out. But again, the NFL is a business. So at the end of the day, that's something that comes with it.
Yeah, like as you said, he was never utilized correctly. The Browns were always looking for that true center fielder, the free safety to kind of sit back there and make plays. I feel like that's the safety Schwartz wants as well. And that's just not who John Johnson was. So obviously it's really unfortunate, but it just wasn't that just wasn't the right fit. You know, staying on that topic, the Browns have several free agents leaving this year. You know, we got Kareem Hunt, an unrestricted free agent, Clowney, Anthony Walker, Sione, Chris Hubbard, Greedy Williams, Jacoby Brissett, of course, and then Deion Jones and Finn Pochich. Do you see them bringing any of these guys back? I know Kareem Hunt, Clowney seem pretty unrealistic right now, but out of those guys, do you see them looking to bring any of them back?
So yeah, going through that list, I'd say Kareem, Jacoby, and Pochich. I highly doubt you see any of them back. I think if you see them back, that means that their market failed to develop in free agency, and it's a factor of them enjoying their time in Cleveland. And Clowney, we know that's not the case, but I think if you see any of them back, that shows you that their market just wasn't there in free agency, and the Browns obviously know that they have a need at that position, whether it be depth-wise or at a starting position like in Clowney's case. But I would not, if you're asking me my opinion, I would say all three of them will find a new team next year. As for what I think is the most intriguing to me of this free agent class that we have leaving is the trio of linebackers in Awok, Sione, and Deion Jones. I think, well, the Cleveland linebacker room right now is thin. It's definitely thin. You have JOK, and then you have a bunch of depth guys. You don't have that starting caliber guy beside JOK that you're like, okay, week one, if we're going with this linebacker room, we feel confident with. You don't have that. You have those guys leaving your team right now, so you gotta evaluate who you have leaving, and you gotta evaluate the possible options this offseason. I think if it were up to me, I'd bring back Awok. Awok's as popular a guy as there is in that room. He was having a hell of a year before he got hurt, albeit it was only 3 games in, but he was playing some of the best football I think I've seen him play. He was voted captain in only his second year. I think Sione's done a really good job for Cleveland special teams wise, and then having to jump in whenever injuries called him into playtime. And then Deion Jones, he he was solid at the end of the year for us, having been picked up midway through. So I think of those linebackers, you could maybe bring back two. I don't think you could bring. I don't see them really bringing back all three. But if I had to bank on it, I think it will be a walk and Sione coming back. And then as for Pocic, I think he's gonna. I think there will be a market for him. Pocic had a really good year for Cleveland, kind of coming out of nowhere from Seattle last year as a kind of depth signing before I believe we released JC. So we didn't really think of any. We didn't think of it as much when we signed him, but he did a really good job this year. And then Cleveland obviously has Nick Harris coming back. So I don't think it makes sense for Cleveland to drop, I'd say $3 to $5 million on a center, given the scheme that we run and the ability for Nick Harris to probably step in and be not maybe as successful, but somewhere in that ballpark of what Pocic was able to do this year. So if you were to pick a couple, who do you think would be your most crucial picks to bring back?
So I think Anthony Walker, of course, is a no-brainer, and not
Yeah.
just because he's a really good linebacker, but I feel like the defense last year was missing a voice. Miles is a great talent, but he's not that voice. I feel like Anthony Walker, when he was there, he commanded the team. He was a great leader. And also our run defense, the second he left, like you saw immediately in that Atlanta game, they couldn't tackle, they couldn't stop the run.
Yeah.
Him being back would be absolutely huge for them. Of course, if he can recover from that injury. I think Deion Jones, if you can't get AWalk back, you got to go and grab him. They need to shore up that linebacker position, and I feel like they can't really afford to go external for that. I feel like just those linebackers are the two most important. Obviously, having Hunt back would be great, but he's looking to be a starter. He's looking to get a payday. I think AWalk and or Deion Jones are very realistic options to try and re-sign. Staying on that topic of free agency, a lot of people in the Browns organization, fans, everyone that watches and supports this team thinks left tackle is a huge concern and want them, to kind of try and replace Jedrick Wills. And with that fifth-year option coming up, I was wondering what you think, if they should pick it up or if, they should kind of try and admit the mistake and move on from him. So what were your opinions on that?
Well, here's the thing with Barry. I think Barry just showed us he's willing to admit his mistakes when he makes them. He just cut John Johnson. That was one of the first moves he ever made. But with Jedrick Wills, with the position that Cleveland's in currently, with the draft capital and with the salary cap that we have going on, I think they will pick up the fifth-year option. Whether that's going to be a long-term commitment or will just be one more year remains to be seen. But Cleveland doesn't really have the capital to address left tackle right now in a big way. So I think there's tons of reason to be concerned with Jed. He shows minimal effort. He's struggled in pass blocking over his career. Last year, I feel like was as low as it got. It was, I mean, there were just times where you'd be like, what is he doing? He just gives up on plays. He's like facing the other way while the quarterback's trying to evade pressure. It was just, I think last year it kind of came to a head a little bit. So it makes sense to me why people on social media are kind of calling for Cleveland to move in another direction. It's just there's not many options for I guess you could say an upgrade. And I think Cleveland knows that, and that's why they will pick up the fifth-year option. I think it's something you can probably kick down the road to next offseason, and then you really got to make your decision. But it's something that I expect Cleveland to do. And I think given the situation that we're in, I think it's probably the right decision.
Yeah, I'd have to agree that, you're not going to go external and pay a premium left tackle, top dollar when you've got all these defensive needs. And, Jed does, obviously he takes a lot of penalties. He's not great in pass protection at times, but he does have that potential. And, if he can really get his work ethic right and, start to dial in and, take it, seriously, which is crazy to say since he's an NFL player, he really could maximize his ceiling. As we're talking about free agents, I really expect Andrew Berry to be aggressive this season. I think Stefanski, AB, all their jobs are on the line this year. They have to make the playoffs. So with the DW restructure, we'll put this tweet on the screen of Jack Duff and breaking down the salary cap. They should
Yeah.
be looking to restructure Deshaun Watson, Wyatt Teller, Batonio, maybe even Miles. And I'm pretty sure with all those restructures, it could clear close to 3 million in cap space. As I said, we'll put it on the screen. So do you think it's kind of a make or break offseason for AB, and he's kind of going to be swinging for the fences and taking, those calculated shots where he can and trying to bring in these top players? So,
Well, I think here's the thing. I think a lot of times in sports, it's less on the front office as it is on the players. Like the front office can only do so much. So say AB goes out and he addresses all the needs again this year and they still fail to perform. If he really does have this great offseason, like I feel like he will, and like he's done in the past where we've been the offseason champions as we have been every year since he's been here, I don't think he's on the way out as much as Stefanski may be. I think Stefanski's seat is definitely getting hotter than AB's is, and I think it will be getting hotter as the season progresses, should they not start in a positive way. But again, I do think that front offices have an opportunity to put the best product on the field possible. And then at the end of the day, it's the players who have to sort of they just have to play. They got to win. It's in their hands. The front office can only do so much. They can only put together the best sort of pieces that they can. They're not the ones playing. It's the pieces that they put together that have to gel, and they gotta play well together in order for the team to succeed. So I wouldn't say AB is on the hot seat, but I think it would definitely be concerning should there be another positive offseason where we go to week 1 and we're like, we got a chance to win the Super Bowl, and then they miss the playoffs again. So that I don't think that's gonna happen. But I mean, it's the Cleveland Browns, so you really never know. And I think he has a lot of opportunities this offseason to address needs. I think, like you said, there's a lot of opportunity to also make cap space with the restructures, and that's something he said he's willing to do this week at the Combine when he was asked about it. So I think there's plenty of opportunity to get this right, and there's plenty of time to, see what works and see like what would be the best call for AB and Co to kind of do with this offseason. It's perfectly spread out. Like there's a lot of opportunity, but again, they have to get it right this year. So, I mean, going from that, there's a lot of urgency this year with the free agents. So, who are some of the free agents that you think Cleveland should bring in that are just like, give me your top 3 that are just like, we need them in Cleveland, and then a couple more guys that are like fantasy. You could also give me a couple trade targets, whatever you feel like.
All right, so the wish list, I'm gonna go with Javon Hargrave. I feel like they need that anchor in the middle. A big defensive tackle. He's got a good relationship with Schwartz. It'll probably be tough to prime from Philadelphia, but he's number 1 on my wish list right now. A questionable one that not a lot of people have talked about. I feel like Deshaun Watson really needs that running back coming out of the backfield that can make plays in space, catch the ball out of the backfield and really make a lot of plays. So I'd have to say Jerick McKinnon. He was phenomenal for the Chiefs, and maybe he's someone who'd want a bigger role, and I feel like he could get that in Cleveland because the Chiefs also have a lot of other guys that can catch the ball out of the backfield with Pacheco. So he'd be another one of my guys for sure. And then, of course, we need to shore up the defensive end position. Khalil Mack is a guy I really could see getting cut from the Chargers. It would clear $27 million in cap space for them. If he ends up getting released, he'd be a huge addition to this team to play opposite side Miles. And of course, if you can't land him, I think Brandon Graham's another really realistic option. Of course, as you said before, he loves Jim Schwartz. He said it was an absolute home run when Cleveland signed him to be their defensive coordinator. Some fantasy guys, I think Jessie Bates, if you could get the money to work, would be a perfect fit, for them. He would shore up the back end of their secondary, and I really think it could take them to being one of the best secondaries in the entire NFL. Of course, for talking fantasy, DeAndre Hopkins would be crazy, but of course it's not really realistic if he's a $30 million cap hit and you don't want to give up that draft capital for an aging
And I think it would be a
wide
second
receiver.
for him too. That's what the
Yeah,
latest
second,
reports are
it's
saying,
tough.
second for D-Hop. So I don't know.
It's a lot of value for a guy on a difficult contract, especially with us when you're paying the quarterback what we're paying Deshaun. Someone I think who's realistic, who I actually think would be a great fit, is Brandin Cooks. And if they can't address it in free agency and the board keeps getting thinner at wide receiver, and there's not really a guy they can get, in the second round, I think that's something they'll explore, down the road.
And I also think
So
that's an intriguing one because that's something you can do after the draft. So say you're not looking to pick up one of these receivers in free agency, because I think this free agent market, that's not where I'd want to address sort of the wide receiver room, because I don't think there's a lot of premier talent within the sort of crop this year. So I think, again, like we in the years we've seen previous where there isn't that top tier talent in free agency at wide receiver, you see guys like Juju Smith-Schuster, you see guys like Christian Kirk, I think last year, getting the contracts that they do when they're getting when you'd expect them in a normal year to be getting like 10 to 15, these guys are going and getting 20 when they're not worth 20. So I think that's something you want to avoid when the market really isn't what it should be. It's kind of exaggerated given the lack of talent. And I think that's something Barry's been able to avoid in his tenure, but I think that will be the case again this year. So I'm hoping that they don't address it in free agency. The draft it sets up nicely for them to pick up a speedster at 42. But say they don't like how the board plays out at 42, they want to go for a different position, or they trade back, et cetera, et cetera. Like you can't, it's hard to predict right now because we don't really know how they want to start this offseason. Well, it'll become much clearer as we get closer to April and free agency has kind of begun. But say you don't have a receiver on your team, like a quality wide receiver on your team by round 7 of the draft, I think you can still call the Texans after and make something work for Cook. So I think that's another intriguing one. But I also think that Cleveland needs to address tight end number 2. I think Harrison Bryant, he's had his moments, but I think you can go and pick up a veteran guy like Jordan Akins, who's had time with Deshaun on a cheap deal, who's proven to be a quality tight end 2. I think 2 guys that have been rumored to Cleveland this week at the Combine, Hayden Hurst and Foster Monroe. I think both of those guys are solid options. I think both of them are upgrades from Harrison Bryant, and I think I think it's a given that Cleveland addresses that position this offseason because like Stefanski loves running 2 tight ends. Like it's a crucial part of his scheme, and it's something that I wouldn't say has been neglected with Harrison Bryant because of his sort of abilities, but I don't think it hasn't been as strong due to Harrison Bryant's I'd say lack of top tier talent, I guess you could say. So I think Cleveland's showing that. They've interviewed 3 tight ends at the Combine this week, and then lots of rumors are swirling that they're going to be definitely in the market for one of those intermediate to above average tight ends to bring in for next year. So just sticking with the Combine, we have pick number 42. There's a plethora of options we can go with. You can go receiver, you can trade back, you can go DT, you can go defensive end. I think I don't see Cleveland going off the board with their top pick like they did last year with Emerson when we were all expecting an edge or receiver. But again, you can trade back, and then who knows what can happen when you pick up picks. I think that's going to be a common theme of this year's draft just because I think it's a really deep draft. So I think you can get guys late that teams value just as high as you can just as high as the guys that are going to be going within the 40s. Like you can get a guy like in the 50s to early 60s that is just as valuable to a team as someone going in the 40s to 49. So I think that's going to be interesting. A lot of what I've been reading is that teams really believe in the depth of this draft and are going to be looking to pick up picks late they're going to be looking to move back and pick up picks for next year. So I think that's definitely going to be something to watch. Combine is today for wide receivers. We've seen the DTs, we've seen the linebackers, we've seen the defensive backs, and we've seen the edge guys. If you were making the pick at 42, based off what you've seen, based off your view of this roster, based off what you've been reading, what do you think Cleveland's gonna do, and what would you do?
I think it has to be a wide receiver. The one thing this offense was missing was speed. They didn't have a deep threat. Obviously, Anthony Schwartz didn't pan out the way he'd hoped, simply just couldn't run routes at the next level. But they really need that guy who can take the top off the defense. And if I'm sitting there at 42 and one of Tyler Scott, Josh Downs, or Jalen Hyde are on the board, no brainer. I'm taking one of those guys. I think right away, either of those guys, either of the three of those guys could take the offense to the next level. Speed is something that we need. We're probably going to shift to more of an air raid spread type offense, a lot more three receiver. When you have a quarterback at $50 million cap hit, you're going to want to build around him. So I expect us to shift to more of a spread type air raid. And for that to be effective, we really need a speed receiver. And as you said, it's tough to predict because we don't know what's going to happen in free agency. But I can't imagine AB paying market price for one of any of these receivers that we've seen in free agency. And of course, like Juju, Jacoby Myers, like they don't really fit the mold. And with the depth at receiver in the draft, I can't really fathom a way it wouldn't be a receiver at 42. And I'm just praying that it can be one of Hyatt, Downs or Tyler Scott, the guy who grew up a Browns fan and's got game breaking speed.
And here's what I think. So I think you definitely address interior D line in free agency, and I think you definitely address linebacker in free agency because if you like, we're looking at the roster right now. You have one linebacker that you're comfortable playing with, so that kind of gets lost just because we're kind of assuming that they're going to bring back some of these linebackers that were with Cleveland and are now free agents. But again, that's not a given. So I think linebacker you definitely address in free agency, hopefully bringing those guys back, and then interior D line with the Hargraves, with other guys that with the
Fletcher
Fletcher
Cox,
Coxes of
Brandon
the
Graham,
world. Yeah, it would have been nice to get what's our buddy from
Deron
Washington's name?
Payne.
Deron Payne. It would have been nice to get Deron Payne, but
Hurts.
it makes sense why you tag a guy like that given all he can do. But I think that's definitely a position that is better suited to address in free agency versus bank on the depth that you'll see at 42 because I think the interior D line class is kind of it's not as deep as I'd say the edge class is. So I think you address those two positions in free agency, and then looking at the edge class in the draft, I got the chance to watch a lot of the combine stuff this week for the edge guys. So I think there's a bunch of guys who are going to kind of land in that beginning of day two time that have a lot of upside. Guys like Will McDonald, Keon White, Yaya Diaby, Byron Young from Tennessee. There's two Byron Youngs in this class. Isaiah Foskey, I thought had a really nice day during his combine. And then another guy, Andre Carter, who I thought had a bit of a rough day. But there's a bunch of ways Cleveland can go at this. There's not one make or break. Like we have to go receiver, we have to go edge. I think you can. The beauty of having those two options, you can go best player available. Whoever you have highest on your board, you can take them and feel very comfortable about where you are as a team. I think this is a draft that you got to take advantage of the depth, and it's a good draft not to have a first round. Not to have a first round because it's never a good thing to not have a first rounder. But if you're not gonna have a first rounder, you want the draft to be deep. You don't want it to be top heavy, and this is the perfect class for that. It's a class with a lot of talent moving into those day two rounds, round 2, 3. So it's an exciting time. I think
if it was me, I would not overlook the edge class just out of a point of view, just to look at only the receivers because it's more, flashy. And that's something that I feel like we want to address and give to Sean as much support as we can. But we also can't neglect the necessity to help out Miles and bring him that edge of the future, which we still have not been able to find. So I think that's also an important thing, which Cleveland needs to hit this offseason, whether it be through free agency or not. Through free agency, you're not going to find that edge of the future because of the guys that are in this class. But I think through the draft in the second round, you can find that. If you hit on the right guy, there are a lot of guys with really nice upside with solid production in college that have the ability to be that moving forward. So I think the draft suits Cleveland's positional needs kind of well based off where they're going to be selecting. They've kind of gotten a little bit lucky. They have to address free agency in the right way, so that way the draft kind of suits their hand perfectly. So, like I said, I think defensive tackle and linebacker, maybe even tight end, you address in free agency. as well as a safety. And then in the draft, you go after your receiver, you go after your edge of the future, and then you just draft for depth. That's what I would do. So for our final thing that we need to discuss before free agency gets started, before we kind of get into the full swing of the offseason, stadium talk. So with the purchase of the Milwaukee Bucks, a lot has been made about Cleveland Stadium and its kind of inability to be a 12-month of the year kind of facility for not only the Browns, but just Cleveland in general, concerts, conventions, et cetera, that a lot of these domed in or closed in stadiums around the country have. So, Matt, what are your thoughts? A lot has been made of Cleveland fans loving to rough out the cold and it being an advantage for the Browns, having practice there, having like roughing the elements all throughout the week. But as we saw this past year against the Saints, it really wasn't much of an advantage for Cleveland.
Yeah, like I think a huge consideration with it also just isn't football related. If they do go towards a dome, they could host, as you said before, more events such as concerts and maybe if they're lucky, even a Super Bowl one day. But yeah, I think a dome is what real football is. Everyone wants to say football is this outdoor sport that you need to play with the elements. But the way the game is these days, it's these quarterbacks throwing the ball 50 times. And, that's really, it's pretty close to impossible to do in the snow. And as hard as it is to say, and as much as people love these cold weather games, it didn't really show last year as the crowd was barely half full for that Saints game. And it's crazy to say that this decision could be made because of a quarterback, but with the quarterback we have, we're going to be one of those teams that's starting to air the ball at 40, to 50 times a game, and a dome could really take our offense to the next level. And I just think the way that the NFL has kind of transitioned into much more of a passing game, that domes should be implemented as much as they can all over the NFL, because that's the way football today is meant to be played.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I see this notion of Cleveland's at an advantage by playing in the elements and playing with the elements, but we're not. Like,
not at
how
all.
many times in this past 3 years have we had like tsunamis? Not tsunamis, but it's like weather where it's like 60-mile-an-hour winds, snow's coming in all directions. You can't kick, you can't throw. It's like tsunami weather. Everyone's always like, "Oh, Cleveland roughs the elements." It's part of it. It's like what we've always done, but at a certain point you have to adapt with the times. All these teams are making these new facilities with multi-billion-dollar commitments from their owners in the cities that are just state-of-the-art facilities, and I think Cleveland's next in line for that. First Energy is kind of outdated. I don't think you can just throw a dome on it. I read a report from a team that kind of analyzed it that said that the facility is not up to the standards to where you could just architecturally put a dome on it and it be successful. So I think if you're talking about putting on a dome, you got to make an entirely new stadium, which I think the Haslams are interested in doing. So I think that's definitely something that's going to be talked about more as we get closer to the summertime, where I think they're going to reevaluate this. But Cleveland's lease is up with First Energy in 2028, I believe. So this is a decision that needs to kind of get moving forward if they want to have a new home kind of in time for their lease to be up. So that kind of wraps up all we have to discuss today. This is our first episode back. We just kind of wanted to outline everything that we got moving forward, everything that we got coming up, and everything that's kind of happened in the last, I'd say, 12-month span. So it's an exciting time to be a Browns fan once again, since we are always the offseason champs. So this is our time to roll. So Combine's going on as we speak. Free agency is less than 2 weeks away. So we will be back again, hopefully with a special guest, or we'll just be back discussing everything free agency. So appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Thanks for coming in.